Dawn over the Anatolian plains should have meant hope, but this morning the light feels cruel. 70,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire stand in a vast crescent of armor and dust outside Ankara, banners hanging heavy in the heat. Across the shimmering distance, 90,000 of Timur's warriors mass on the far ridges, horsetails and drum flags cutting dark strokes against a bleached sky. The ground between them is already churned into powder by hooves and marching feet, a pale sea waiting to swallow whoever moves first. Drums roll from both sides, a slow, hammering pulse that rattles shields and throats. Along the Ottoman lines, men taste metal on their tongues, dry from thirst and fear, while messengers gallop past with orders that feel thinner than the dust they kick up. Then the signal comes. The chant for the Ottoman Sultan surges down the ranks, spears and sabers tilt forward, and the crescent begins to close on the center of Timur's army. But as the two great hosts finally surge toward each other, one question hangs over the field like the haze itself. How could an empire that marched here with 70,000 men end this day in chains before 90,000? Years before the dust of Ankara began to glow in the morning sun, the Ottoman Empire had moved like a storm across the map. Under its sultan, the empire crushed crusader armies at Nicopolis, bent Balkan lords to its will, and pressed so close to Constantinople that church bells there sounded more like alarms than hymns. In Anatolia, beyliks that once traded insults and border raids suddenly found themselves pulled into a single, tightening fist. Markets flowed with new taxes, caravans used Ottoman roads, and rivals watched the empire's banners appear on horizons they once thought safely distant. Yet every conquest carried a shadow. Princes of broken states fled east, carrying stories of burned honor and shattered treaties. They whispered those stories in the courts of another conqueror, Timur, whose own realm stretched from Central Asia to Persia like a scar carved through mountains and deserts. To Timur, a rising Ottoman power in Anatolia was not just a neighbor, it was a challenge, a rival for the loyalty of cities, scholars, and restless warriors across the Islamic world, and one day it would pull 70,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire onto an unforgiving plain outside Ankara. And by then, it would be too late to turn back. For the Ottoman Sultan, victory had become a habit. After Nicopolis, he was spoken of as the Hammer of the Balkans, a ruler who could summon tens of thousands and make kings wait outside his tent. In Anatolia, he moved just as relentlessly, breaking or absorbing the beyliks that had once filled the plateau with a patchwork of small thrones. Each new conquest tightened his grip on caravan routes and mountain passes, but it also pushed desperate rivals straight into Timur's open arms. Those exiled rulers reached Timur's court with chests full of grievances and maps of every road, river, and fortress the Ottoman Empire now claimed. Timur listened, measured, and began to see Anatolia not as a distant frontier, but as a stage for his own legend. When sharp letters passed between the two rulers arguing over titles, prisoners, and who had the right to protect certain cities, the ink felt almost as dangerous as steel. Pride hardened on both sides, and between pride and fear, armies began to move. Yet on the long road to Ankara, the greatest danger to the Ottoman Empire was not even marching under Timur's banners. It was hidden among its own ranks. Timur did not ride west as a mere raider looking for loot. His empire already stretched across cities older than most Ottoman fortresses, fed by the trade of silk, spices, and scholars. What he wanted from Anatolia was not just land, but proof that no rival could claim to be the single towering power of the Muslim world while he still drew breath. When word reached him that the Ottoman Sultan called himself a Padishah of many realms, kept emperors under siege, and crushed the beyliks that once paid Timur respect, the insult cut deeper than any border dispute. Envoys rode back and forth, carrying letters sharpened like blades. Each side demanded prisoners, territory, and recognition. Each side refused. Somewhere between these exchanges, the last chance for peace quietly died. Still, the field near Ankara did not form overnight. Step by step, Timur burned a path through eastern Anatolia, while the Ottoman Empire tightened its grip in the west, both rulers convinced that the other would eventually have to kneel. And then, at the edge of a sweltering summer, they finally chose the same ground. By the time both hosts fully faced each other outside Ankara, the land itself had already chosen a side. Timur's army reached the area first and settled along the better wells. Their camps spread in disciplined rows where water and fodder could still be found. When the Ottoman army finally arrived, 70,000 strong after a grinding march and earlier campaigns, they discovered a plain baked by summer and stripped of comfort. Dust clung to armor, throats cracked, and horses tossed their heads at dry troughs. The Ottoman Empire had brought a force worthy of its reputation, a blend of hardened Balkan troops, elite janissaries, and Turkic cavalry. But the air around them felt tired, as if every man had spent his strength before the first charge. Across the field, Timur's banners moved with unnerving calm, drums beating in steady patterns, while engineers and scouts mapped every fold of ground. Ottoman commanders studied the ridges and low hills, searching for an angle, a weakness, anything that could turn numbers and experience back in their favor. Yet with each passing hour under the brutal sun, another fear quietly grew. What if the greatest enemy they faced at Ankara was not Timur's 90,000, but time, heat, and thirst? As the last Ottoman units shook themselves into position, the neat crescent of the morning thickened into a forest of lances and dust. Commanders rode the lines, shouting final orders to Balkan infantry at the center. Janissaries crouched behind wooden stakes, and waves of Turkic cavalry holding the wings. Yet even here, among the banners of the Ottoman Empire, not every heart beat the same. Some Anatolian contingents had once sworn loyalty to Timur. Others had been crushed by the Sultan only years before, and now they watched both camps with wary, calculating eyes. Across the field, Timur's army arranged itself like a moving city. Deep ranks of horse archers, heavy cavalry in layered armor, and even lines of war elephants armored in leather and bells, snorting in the heat. Engineers shifted wagons, dust screens, and stakes, shaping the plain into a trap as much as a battlefield. Scouts flowed back to Timur's command tent with reports that Ottoman horses were already straining for water. The Sultan's pride demanded an attack before thirst gnawed any deeper, before hesitant allies had time to remember old grudges. So as the sun climbed higher and shadows shrank, the order crept down the lines. Advance now, before hesitation does what Timur's arrows have not yet done. When the order finally rolled down the line, the Ottoman front did not walk, it surged. Drums thundered, horns cut the heavy air, and the center of the Ottoman Empire's army moved forward in one vast, uneven wave. Balkan infantry locked shields and pressed ahead, their boots pounding a rhythm through the dust. Behind them, janissaries advanced in measured steps, muskets and bows ready, faces set in a calm that looked almost unnatural amid the roar. On the wings, Turkic cavalry kicked up clouds that blurred the horizon, lances tilting toward Timur's distant standards. For a brief moment, it looked like every victory the empire had ever won was about to repeat itself on a grander scale. Timur's front ranks met the advance with a storm of arrows, dark swarms that hissed down like locusts. Horses screamed and stumbled. Men raised shields and cloaks, but the momentum did not break. Ottoman volleys answered, iron-tipped shafts arcing over their own troops to hammer into the first lines of Timur's horsemen. Under the weight of that push, parts of Timur's forward screen began to bend, then peel back, turning their horses and streaming away, as if the center of his army were already starting to crack. From the Ottoman vantage point, it looked like the moment they had come for. The 90,000 before them were giving ground. The proud conqueror from the east forced to step back. But as the dust thickened and the first enemy units seemed to melt away, one detail was easy to miss from the Ottoman front ranks. Timur's banners on the distant ridges were not retreating, they were waiting. From the Ottoman front, the first enemy horsemen wheeling away looked like victory. Standards dipped, shouts burst out, and the line drove harder, chasing the hollowing center of Timur's screen. But the farther they pushed, the stranger the ground became. The plain tightened into folds and dry gullies. Arrows kept falling, not in wild storms now, but in measured waves from just beyond easy range. It felt as if Timur's 90,000 were reaching out and pulling the Ottoman Empire forward by invisible ropes. On the wings, Turkic cavalry and Ottoman service tried to swing wide for the encirclement their commanders trusted. Instead, they met more of Timur's riders already waiting in depth, falling back by design, never quite breaking, always drawing them farther from the janissaries and infantry at the core. Some Anatolian contingents began to slow, eyes flicking toward familiar tribal banners in Timur's lines. Messengers galloped to the Sultan, warning of confusion, of units drifting ahead. Yet with the main body surging and Timur's front still giving ground, there was no way to halt without seeming like the first side to lose its nerve. So the Ottoman advance kept rolling. Deeper into the funnel Timur had quietly traced into this plain. The farther the Ottoman vanguard pressed, the more the plain seemed to close around them. Heat rose in visible shimmers, turning hills into wavering shapes and robbing men of certainty. Waterskins sagged empty at belts. Horses lathered and tossed their heads. Yet still the chant for the Sultan rolled along the ranks, pushing 70,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire deeper into Timur's design. Ahead, enemy horsemen wheeled, loosed arrows, and fled again, always just beyond the reach of a decisive clash. Then, along one of the Ottoman wings, the shouting changed. A cluster of Anatolian cavalry, men whose beyliks had once ridden under Timur's favor, slowed under the arrow fire. Instead of lowering their lances for another charge, they edged away, drifting sideways through the dust until their banners blurred and reappeared beside Timur's lines. What began as a trickle of desertion spread like a crack in dry earth. Some units simply held back, others turned more openly. The core of the Ottoman army still fought on, Janissaries tightening their formation around their standards, but the great crescent promising to crush Timur's 90,000 was no longer whole. And as enemy reserves began to move on the ridges, the Sultan faced a choice that could not be delayed. The decision came like a fist on a map. With his wings fraying and the dust ahead thick with arrows, the Ottoman Sultan chose the only path that still looked like honor. Drive the center straight at Timur before the cracks on the flanks tore wider. Drums snapped a new rhythm, and messengers spurred away with one hard order: hold the sides as long as possible and throw everything into the middle. Janissaries stepped forward in tight ranks, their discipline anchoring the Ottoman Empire's weary advance. Behind rough barricades, they planted their standards and fired in sharp volleys, trying to cut a gap in the riders ahead. Balkan infantry pushed up beside them, shields locking, spears leveling for a shove that felt less like a verdict and more like survival. But Timur had not built his line to be simply broken. As the Ottoman center ground forward, the masses behind his vanguard began to move heavy cavalry columns, wheeling in from both sides, and farther back, the silhouettes of war elephants edging closer through the dust. The Sultan's gamble might still tear open Timur's front, or it might drive the heart of his 70,000 straight into a cage already closing. For a brief, breathless stretch of time, it seemed the Sultan's gamble might actually work. The Ottoman center ground forward step by brutal step, Janissaries firing and reloading in tight, drilled motions as arrows rattled off their shields. Ahead of them, parts of Timur's forward line wavered under the pressure, horses rearing, riders yanking reins to avoid the slow, relentless push of pikes and steel. From inside that choking dust, it was easy to believe that sheer determination could still tear open the heart of Timur's 90,000. But on the flanks, the battle was slipping away grain by grain. More Anatolian contingents peeled off or simply drifted back, their loyalty dissolving under the weight of old grievances and fresh fear. Where the crescent of the Ottoman Empire had once promised to close like a fist, gaps yawned open instead. Through those gaps, Timur's heavy cavalry began to pour in, their armor dark with sweat and dust, their banners coming in at angles that felt wrong, too deep, too fast. Commanders near the Sultan saw the pattern forming the center lunging ahead, while the sides hollowed out and understood the choice narrowing before them. If this advance did not break Timur soon, it would break the Ottoman Empire instead. As Timur's heavy cavalry punched through the softening wings, the shape of the battlefield twisted. What had begun as two facing lines was turning into a tightening ring around the Ottoman core. Dust rose so thick it dimmed the sun, turning banners into ghosts and orders into rumors. Janissaries in the center planted their standards and refused to yield, forming bristling squares of pikes and muskets that beat back charge after charge. For a moment, their discipline carved small clearings in the chaos, circles where the ground was theirs alone. Yet every time they pushed Timur's riders away, new arrows swept in from other angles. Fresh horse archers appeared on the fringes, loosing from beyond spear reach before wheeling out of sight again. On what remained of the Ottoman wings, loyal cavalry tried to countercharge and buy time, only to find themselves isolated, crushed in pockets far from the Sultan's gaze. Each lost squadron tightened the noose. Messengers reached the command group gasping, dust-caked, bringing the same news from every direction. The army of the Ottoman Empire was no longer a line. It was a shrinking island, surrounded on almost every side, with the heat, thirst, and sheer weight of Timur's 90,000 grinding the edges inward. In the eye of the tightening ring, the Sultan rode forward among his remaining guard, searching the swirling dust for any sign of a gap. The plan had been simple in his council tent: crush Timur's center, scatter his vanguard, then turn on the flanks before they could fully engage. On the map, the lines had obeyed. On the real plain outside Ankara, they had betrayed him. Timur's 90,000 refused to break. They bent, thinned, and then reappeared on the sides, their horses still finding strength in ground the enemy had chosen days before. Reports shouted over the din, claimed that one flank might still be weak, that some of Timur's contingents there were lighter troops, less armored. Other voices swore that the only hope was to pull back and reform closer to the city's defenses. Each option carried the same terrible cost. Men who could not move fast enough would be left behind. As the sun burned low and shadows finally lengthened, the battered core of the Ottoman Empire faced a decision it had never truly imagined. At the height of its power, whether to fight for a breakout that might shatter the army, or hold the shrinking circle and risk seeing its sultan swallowed in Timur's cage. As the sun leaned west, the Ottoman sultan chose the more terrible courage. He ordered a breakout. Trumpets shrilled, and what remained of the Ottoman center drove forward in one last, ragged surge. Janissaries and Balkan infantry locking ranks around their standards. For a few astonishing minutes, they punched a wound into Timur's line, hurling back tired horsemen and forcing even veteran riders to give ground. 70,000 had marched here under the banners of the Ottoman Empire. Now only a fraction still moved as one, but that fraction fought like a trapped heartbeat. Timur answered with the weight he had held in reserve. From the dust on both flanks, columns of armored cavalry slammed inward, while ahead, war elephants lumbered closer, bells clanking, pressing the gap shut. Arrow storms fell into the Ottoman mass from every side. Horses collapsed, shields tangled. The breakout force slowed, then jammed, then froze in a crush of men and exhausted animals. Command signals vanished in the noise. By the time the light began to fade, the great army on this plain was no longer an army. It was a scattered ring of pockets being beaten down one by one, with the Sultan's own camp swallowed in the tightening circle that Timur had drawn around Ankara. When the dust finally settled over Ankara, the plain went quiet. Broken wagons, torn banners, and riderless horses marked where 70,000 soldiers of the Ottoman Empire had stood that morning. Now scattered groups of survivors slipped toward hills and distant towns, the rest taken by death, capture, or confusion. In Timur's camp, under the eyes of guards and the weight of iron, the Sultan who had besieged Constantinople now sat as a prisoner, an emperor in chains before the man whose 90,000 warriors had unmade his army. Ankara was more than a lost field. It shattered the belief that the Ottoman Empire could only move forward. With its ruler taken and its main host destroyed, the realm cracked into rival prince domains, brothers and factions tearing at what remained in a struggle later called the interregnum. In the Balkans, vassal states and old enemies drew a long breath, thinking the tide had gone out for good. Timur's fame surged as the conqueror who had stopped the Ottomans. Yet the idea behind those fallen banners did not die. The empire would rise again, marked forever by the day when 70,000 had marched out in confidence and learned how quickly power can narrow to a ring of dust, a single tent, and chains around a king.